The lawyer's voice on the phone said I'd inherited my great-aunt's farm, but by the time I got there, my cousin had already moved into the house and changed the locks. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow, I'm sharing a story that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. I was 22 years old when Great Aunt Mary Ann died, living in a cramped studio apartment in Portland and working double shifts at a diner just to make rent. I hadn't seen her since I was maybe 7 years old, back before my mom passed away from cancer, and my dad disappeared into his grief and then into nothing. I'd spent my teenage years bouncing between my dad's sister's house and sleeping on friends' couches, always feeling like I was one mistake away from having nowhere to go. So, when a lawyer named Mr. Peterson called and told me that Mary Ann had left me her property in rural Montana, I thought it was some kind of scam. A farm with 180 acres, a main house, 2 barns, and several outbuildings. It sounded impossible. Your great-aunt was very specific in her will, Mr. Peterson explained. Everything goes to you, Claire. She said you were the only one who ever really listened to her stories. I barely remembered those stories. I'd been so young, sitting on her porch while she shelled peas and talked about the land, about her husband who died in Vietnam, about keeping things safe for the right person. But apparently, she'd remembered me. There's one complication, Mr. Peterson continued, his voice tightening slightly. Your cousin Derek has been living on the property for the past 6 months. Mary Ann let him stay there while he got back on his feet after a divorce. He's aware of the will's contents, and I've sent him formal notification that he needs to vacate within 30 days. Derek, I hadn't thought about him in years. He was my dad's nephew, maybe 10 years older than me, and I remembered him as someone who was always charming until he wasn't, always had a scheme, always knew how to make adults believe whatever he wanted them to believe. Does he know I'm inheriting? I asked. Yes, I spoke with him yesterday. He seemed surprised by Mary Ann's decision. Something in Mr. Peterson's tone made my stomach clench, but I pushed the feeling aside. This was my chance, maybe my only chance, to have something stable, something that belonged to me. I gave notice at the diner, packed everything I owned into my beat-up Honda, and drove 20 hours to Montana. The address led me down increasingly rural roads until I turned onto a gravel driveway marked by a faded wooden sign that read Holloway Farm. The property was more beautiful than I'd imagined. Rolling fields stretched toward distant mountains, and the main house was a sprawling ranch-style building with a wraparound porch. The 2 barns stood behind it, red paint, weathered but still solid. Everything looked well-maintained, loved. But when I pulled up to the house, Derek was waiting on the porch. He'd aged since I'd last seen him, lines around his eyes and gray threading through his dark hair. But his smile was the same, easy and confident. Little Claire, he said, walking down the steps. Look at you all grown up. Hi, Derek. I'm here to take possession of the property. His smile didn't waver. Yeah, about that. I think there's been some confusion. You see, Aunt Mary Ann and I had an understanding. She was getting pretty confused toward the end, and I was taking care of everything. The real estate, the bills, all of it. I've got documentation showing that she intended to leave the property to me. My heart started pounding. Mr. Peterson said the will was very clear. Wills can be contested. Derek said, his voice still friendly, but with an edge underneath. Especially when the deceased was elderly and possibly not of sound mind. I've already filed paperwork with the probate court. This is going to take months to sort out, maybe years. In the meantime, I'm maintaining the property like I've been doing. You're welcome to come back when it's all settled. I'm not leaving. This is my property. Actually, it's disputed property, Derek corrected, which means nobody's property until the court decides. And since I'm already living here and maintaining it, the court's not going to kick me out. That's not how it works. I felt everything slipping away before I'd even had a chance to hold it. You can't do this. I'm not doing anything except protecting what Aunt Marianne really wanted. Tell you what, though, you look tired from your drive. Why don't you stay at the motel in town, get some rest, and we can talk about this like family tomorrow? I called Mr. Peterson from the motel room, my hands shaking with anger and fear. He can't just refuse to leave, I said. Unfortunately, he can delay things, Mr. Peterson admitted. His filing for a will contest means we have to go through the probate process, and with him already in residence, getting a court order for immediate eviction would be difficult. He knows exactly what he's doing. How long will this take? 6 months minimum, possibly longer. And, Claire, I have to be honest with you. These cases can be expensive. Do you have resources for legal fees? I looked at my bank account balance on my phone. $843. Not really, I whispered. I can work with you on payment plans, but you should know that Derek has apparently hired a firm out of Billings. They're aggressive and expensive, which suggests he's confident about winning, or at least dragging this out until you can't afford to fight anymore. That night, I sat in the cheap motel room and cried harder than I had since my mom died. This was supposed to be my fresh start, my chance to build something, and Derek was stealing it, using the system and his resources and my desperation against me. But I wasn't going to give up, not yet. Over the next week, I found a job waitressing at a truck stop diner 40 minutes from the farm. I rented a room in a house owned by an older woman named Beth, who charged me almost nothing because she felt sorry for me. And I started researching everything I could about Marianne, the farm, and Derek's claims. The local library had newspaper archives that mentioned Marianne and her husband Thomas. I found their wedding announcement from 1968, articles about Thomas's death in 1970, and mentions of Marianne's involvement in the County Historical Society. She'd been a teacher for 30 years, respected in the community, known for her sharp mind even in her 80s. I also found mentions of Derek, a business that had failed in 2012, a lawsuit from former partners in 2015. He'd moved around a lot, always with some new venture, always charming his way into opportunities. At the feed store, I met an elderly man named Walter who'd known Marianne for decades. "She talked about you," he said when I introduced myself. Last few years, she'd mentioned her great-niece Claire, who'd had a hard time after losing her mama. She wanted you to have the farm, said you were the only one who understood what it meant to need a place to belong. Did she ever mention leaving it to Derek? Walter snorted. Hell no. She let him stay there out of kindness, but she didn't trust him far as she could throw him. Told me once that Derek was a user, always had been. She was very clear the farm was going to you. Would you be willing to testify to that? in a heartbeat. I gathered more testimonies, more evidence that Mary Ann had been sound of mind and very intentional about her will. Mr. Peterson filed motions, and we slowly built a case. But Derek had moved into the house completely, was living in Mary Ann's bedroom, driving her truck, acting like he owned everything. And then he started selling things. I found out when Beth mentioned seeing Mary Ann's antique dining set at an estate sale in town. "Isn't that from your great-aunt's place?" she asked. "I recognized it from when I used to visit her." I felt sick. If Derek was liquidating assets, there might not be anything left by the time the court finally ruled in my favor. I drove out to the farm one morning when I knew Derek had gone into town. I didn't go to the house. Instead, I walked the property, trying to understand what Mary Ann had loved about this place. The fields were overgrown, clearly not maintained in months. One of the barns had a broken window that hadn't been repaired. Derek wasn't taking care of anything. He was just squatting and stealing. The second barn was smaller, older, set back near a creek. The door was padlocked, which struck me as odd, since the main barn had been open. I walked around it, peering through gaps in the weathered boards, but I couldn't see much inside. That's when I remembered something. A fragment of memory from that childhood visit. Mary Ann taking me to a small barn, showing me an old trunk, and saying something about treasures that wait for the right person. I called Mr. Peterson. "Does the will mention anything specific about the barns or their contents?" "Let me check." I heard papers rustling. "Yes, actually, there's a clause that says all contents of the property, including any items stored in outbuildings, specifically belong to you." She was very particular about that language. "Derek's been selling furniture from the house. Can we stop him from accessing the barns? If we can prove he's disposing of estate assets before the probate is complete, yes, but we'd need documentation of what's been sold." I started documenting everything. I visited every estate sale, antique shop, and pawn shop within 50 miles, photographing anything that had come from the farm. I got receipts, got shop owners to confirm Derek had been the seller. Each piece of proof felt like a small victory. Mr. Peterson filed an emergency motion to prevent Derek from selling any more property assets, and surprisingly, the judge agreed. Derek was furious when he got the order, calling me directly for the first time. "You're making a mistake," he said, his charm completely gone. "You're fighting for a worthless property that's going to bankrupt you in legal fees. I'm offering you a deal. I'll buy your claim for $20,000. You walk away, I drop the contest, everyone's happy." "The property's worth at least $800,000, I said. "Why would I take $20,000? "Because $20,000 is real money in your hand right now, versus maybe getting a rundown farm in 2 years if you're lucky. Be smart, Claire." "No." He hung up without another word. What comes next is something I never saw coming. Stick with me and make sure you subscribe. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Mr. Peterson that changed everything. The judge has ruled that Derek needs to provide complete accounting of all estate assets and must allow you supervised access to the property to document items for the probate inventory. I met the court-appointed supervisor, a no-nonsense woman named Janet, at the farm the following Tuesday. Derek was there, arms crossed, watching with barely concealed anger as Janet and I walked through the house. So much was missing. The dining room set, obviously. Most of the good furniture from the living room, artwork that I remembered from photographs. Derek had stripped the place. "We'll document everything that's gone," Janet said calmly. "It all counts against him in the final ruling." "I want to check the barns," I said. Derek's jaw tightened. "There's nothing in the barns, just old farm equipment." "Then you won't mind us looking," Janet replied. The main barn was full of rusty equipment, moldy hay bales, and general decay. But the smaller barn, the one that had been padlocked, was different. Derek claimed he'd lost the key to the padlock. Janet had him cut it off with bolt cutters. Inside, the barn was dim and dusty, but surprisingly organized. Old furniture was covered with tarps. Boxes were stacked neatly along the walls, and in the back corner I saw it, the trunk from my memory. It was cedar, about 4 feet long and 3 feet wide, with brass hinges and a heavy lock. My name was carved into the lid. Claire Holloway, for when you need it most. My hands trembled as I touched the carving. Marianne had left this specifically for me. "Do you have the key to this?" Janet asked Derek. "I've never seen that trunk before," he said, but his voice was too tight, too controlled. "The will specifically mentions that all contents of outbuildings belong to Claire," Janet said. "This trunk is part of the estate inventory." We photographed it, measured it, documented it. Janet said I could take it with me that day since it was specifically marked with my name. "I need to find a way to open it without destroying it," I said. Derek spoke up suddenly. "Aunt Marianne kept important keys in a desk in her bedroom. Maybe there's something there." It was the first helpful thing he'd said, which immediately made me suspicious. But Janet agreed to let us check. The desk had been emptied, of course, but when I pulled out the drawers completely, checking for anything taped underneath, I found a small envelope wedged against the back panel of the bottom drawer. Inside was a brass key and a note in Marianne's handwriting. "Claire, this key opens the cedar trunk in the small barn. What's inside is yours by right and by love. Derek doesn't know it exists, and you should keep it that way until the courts settle everything. Trust Mr. Peterson, trust yourself. The land is yours, but what's in the trunk will secure your future." Aunt Marianne. My heart raced. I slipped the envelope into my pocket without showing Derek, thanking him for the suggestion. Janet helped me load the trunk into her SUV, and we drove it to a secure storage facility in town. "Whatever's in there," she said, "make sure you document it properly. It's part of the estate evaluation." That night, alone in the storage unit with Mr. Peterson and Beth as witnesses, I opened the trunk. Inside were layers of quilts, protecting what lay beneath. As I lifted them away, I uncovered stacks of wooden boxes, each one carefully labeled. Morgan silver dollars, uncirculated, 1891. Gold double eagles, 1876. Mercury dimes, complete set, 1916 to 1945. There were dozens of boxes, each one containing coins carefully preserved in individual holders. Beneath the coins were small paintings, each one wrapped in acid-free paper. I recognized the style immediately from my research. These were original works by Charles Russell, the famous Western artist. 5 small paintings, each one probably worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. At the very bottom was a leather portfolio containing documents, land deeds, stock certificates, bearer bonds from the 1920s that Marianne's family had never cashed, and a letter addressed to me. "Dearest Claire," it began, "if you're reading this, Then you've found the treasure I've kept safe for you. My husband Thomas and I were collectors, and over the years we acquired these coins and paintings as investments. We never needed to sell them, and they've appreciated beyond what we ever imagined. I kept this collection secret in my later years because I didn't trust Derek or several other relatives who might have seen me as a bank account rather than a person. The farm itself is valuable, but this collection will give you the freedom to keep it or sell it, to stay in Montana, or go wherever your heart leads. The choice is yours. I know you've had a hard life, sweetheart. I know your mother's death and your father's absence left you feeling unwanted and temporary. But you're not temporary to me. You're the continuation of everything Thomas and I built, the person we chose to carry our legacy forward. Derek will fight you because that's who he is, but you're stronger than you know, and now you have the resources to fight back. Use this wisely. Make yourself secure, and know that I loved you even from a distance, even when you thought no one was paying attention. Aunt Marianne. Tears streamed down my face as I read her words. Mr. Peterson was examining the coins with growing amazement. "Claire," he said slowly, "these collections could be worth millions. The Morgan silver dollars alone, if they're all uncirculated 1891s, that's easily $200,000. The gold coins, another few $100,000. The Charles Russell paintings." He shook his head. "Each one could sell for $300,000 to $500,000. You're looking at somewhere between $3 and $5 million in this trunk." The room spun. I sat down hard on the storage unit floor. "Derek doesn't know about this," I whispered. "And he's not going to," Mr. Peterson said firmly. "This collection was hidden, separately maintained, and clearly intended for you. It's not part of the general estate he's contesting. This is yours, free and clear." Over the next few days, we had experts authenticate everything. The coins were genuine, professionally graded, and worth even more than Mr. Peterson's initial estimate. The paintings were authenticated as original Charles Russells, each one worth at least $400,000. The bonds and stock certificates had significant value. The total appraisal came to $4.8 million. I sat in Mr. Peterson's office, looking at the documentation, unable to fully process what this meant. "What do I do?" I asked. "First, we secure everything in a bank vault. Second, we continue fighting for the farm because it's rightfully yours, and because Marianne wanted you to have it. But third, and most importantly, you now have the resources to fight Derek for as long as it takes. You can hire the best attorneys, weather any delays, and ensure justice is served. Could I just buy him out? Offer him something to drop the contest?" Mr. Peterson considered this. "We could, but it would reward his bad behavior, and it wouldn't address the theft of estate assets. My recommendation is we pursue the legal case aggressively, document every item he sold, and seek damages. Let him know you have the resources to outlast him." We did exactly that. I hired a second attorney who specialized in estate fraud. We filed motions requesting full accounting of every penny Derek had made from selling Marianne's property. We documented his failure to maintain the farm, his attempts to strip assets, his lies about Marianne's intentions. Derek's attorneys tried to drag things out, but every tactic cost them money, while my legal team, now properly funded, countered effectively. 4 months after I'd opened the trunk, we got a settlement offer. Derek would drop his contest, vacate the property within 10 days, and pay restitution of $80,000 for the items he'd sold. He knows he's going to lose, Mr. Peterson explained. His attorneys probably told him to cut his losses. I want him to admit what he did, I said. I want it on record that he tried to steal my inheritance. The final settlement included a clause requiring Derek to sign a statement acknowledging that Mary Ann's will was valid, that he had no legitimate claim to the property, and that he had improperly sold estate assets. It was legally necessary for the settlement, but to me, it was vindication. On the day Derek moved out, I was there with Mr. Peterson and Janet. He loaded his personal belongings into a truck without making eye contact with me. As he was about to leave, he finally looked at me directly. "You got lucky," he said. "No," I replied calmly. "I got what Aunt Mary Ann wanted me to have. You tried to steal it, and you failed." He drove away without another word, and I walked into my house for the first time as its rightful owner. The place was a mess. Derek had taken everything of value and left behind damage and dirt. But it was mine. Over the next 6 months, I transformed everything. I hired contractors to repair the house and barns. I brought in an agricultural consultant who helped me develop a plan for the land. I sold 3 of the Charles Russell paintings for $1.2 million, using the money to renovate the property and establish a working cattle operation. I kept 2 paintings, the coin collections and the bonds, as long-term investments. The farm became profitable within 18 months, and I hired 3 local workers who'd known Mary Ann and were glad to see the place cared for properly again. Beth moved into one of the renovated outbuildings, becoming my property manager and the closest thing I had to family. Walter from the feed store became my unofficial advisor, teaching me about cattle and crops and the rhythms of rural life. I established a scholarship fund in Mary Ann's name for kids who'd lost parents or aged out of foster care, giving them opportunities to pursue agricultural education. It was my way of honoring her gift and paying forward the chance she'd given me. 3 years after inheriting the farm, I stood on the porch of the main house, watching sunset paint the fields gold. The land was thriving, the cattle were healthy, and I'd built something sustainable and meaningful. I thought about Derek sometimes, wondering if he understood what he'd really lost. Not just the money or the property, but the chance to be part of something bigger than himself. Mary Ann had offered him temporary shelter, and he'd tried to turn it into theft. He'd been so focused on what he could take that he'd never considered what he could have built. The farm had taught me that security doesn't come from seizing what belongs to others. It comes from honoring what's given to you, from working hard, from building connections to land and community and purpose. Mary Ann had given me more than a farm or a hidden fortune. She'd given me proof that I mattered, that someone had thought about my future and planned for my success. She'd given me a foundation to build on and the resources to protect it. And every day I honored that gift by being the person she'd believed I could become. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If it resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel. We share real stories about resilience, justice, and never giving up on what's rightfully yours. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to fight for something that was meant for you? Have you discovered that someone cared about you more than you realized? Share your story with our community. And don't forget to check out one of the two stories on your screen right now. Until next time, remember that you're stronger than you think, and the right inheritance isn't just what you receive, it's what you do with it.